Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News. It is Thursday, August 28th, 9:30 a.m., and this is being done for South Florida Conservative News Center. And we're going to talk about what we would consider a timeline of awareness, as there is now enough information, I think, that we can see amongst these transsexual oriented shooters that there's definitely something there. All transsexuals are not the same, but a lot of, I would say, these shooters, we've had a little bit more chance to look at them and see if there is a common theme, if there is an up and a down, as we would say, bell curve type situation. So we're going to go through this. Obviously, we're getting into different territory than normally is discussed. This is in by no means whatever derogatory to any particular group, so do not set fire to my front yard. All right. So we're going to tackle this. It's a difficult but necessary subject. Difficult because of the amount of insanity around it, more so than it's difficult. So over the past few years, a number of mass shootings in the United States have been carried out by individuals identifying as transgender or non-binary. Now, these incidents are rare, okay? Just as, really, believe it or not, mass shootings are a lot rarer than you think they are. But when we look closely at the cases, a disturbing pattern starts to emerge. And we, or myself, or whoever, we will consider this a timeline of awareness. It's a cycle that begins with the personal vulnerability, builds on activist promises of basically salvation through transition, rises with a surge of public attention and validation, only to collapse into a disillusionment, resentment, and in the most tragic cases, violence. So we're going to walk through that step by step and take a look at the case studies that illustrate it. This is specifically for the shooters. I'm sure a lot of it can carry over to those who commit suicide or anything else of that nature at that point. So every one of these stories begins with a vulnerable person, which is what makes what goes on later even more diabolical. Maybe they've been isolated, they're bullied, or struggle with mental health issues for years. From whatever reason, they've gotten the mental health issue, not always sexually based. In many cases, these individuals are deeply susceptible to suggestion. And when they stumble into activist groups or online communities, they're told, you're not broken, you're special, and transition will save you. It's a powerful message, okay? It replaces a messy, complicated reality, depression, trauma, alienation, etc., with a single solution. Change your body and everything will get better. But the real underlying problems, those rarely get addressed, and they get addressed even less so now than they did when sexual transitions were not as popular 20, 30 years ago as they are at this point, which is when there were psychological screenings and a lot of different things going on to separate the people who really desired this transitional surgery from those who actually had other issues that they were using that as an example. Okay. So this brings us to what is called, I would call, the promise phase. All right. The promise of transition. Activists and influencers, and even some of the peers online will paint transition as the ultimate cure. If you can just get through the hormones, the surgeries, and the struggle, you'll finally be happy. You'll be happier as a boy or a girl than you ever were as a boy or a girl. The whole world is your oyster. In this phase, that person feels a sense of purpose. And you can see this in any of the videos. This is not me with some particular insight. This is very available to you if you are trying to understand, even remotely, why this is going on. Their suffering becomes part of a heroic journey. You know, they post updates, they share photos, and they are showered with likes and comments and encouragement. Okay. If you look at Audrey Hale, who was the Nashville shooter, friends noticed Hale identifying more openly as male in the months before the attack. That's the promise phase, anticipating that day would change when society accepted this new identity. But what happens when the promise doesn't deliver? Okay. For a while, Attention becomes intoxicating. You're very special. You're like an astronaut. You're going off into uncharted territory. Online communities will cheer every step of your activities. Activist circles will treat the person like a symbol of progress. You'll get invited places probably if you're, especially if you're very passable. If you notice, the incredibly passable get most of the play. That's how it is. Nobody likes an ugly transitional person. But that attention isn't permanent. Once the surgeries are done, once the milestones are reached, that spotlight moves on because no longer are you, I guess we could say, necessary to the cause. The cause is the struggle. The struggle is the struggle, if you understand what I'm saying. It's not the end. It's getting you legally, financially, politically into the grinder. Nobody worries about the sausage at the end. All right. So if you have a fragile identity and you've been built up on that attention, which you're unused to at all, the silence will feel like a rejection. It's the most dangerous stage because self-worth is tied at this point to what we call constant validation. And when that validation fades, it sets up the next phase, which is collapse. Okay. As they was his name, everybody's famous for 15 minutes or whatever. How you handle life after that 15 minutes is the real thing. So now the next phase is usually collapse. Reality sets in. The surgeries did not erase the depression. All that pain, right? All the endless hours, all the rehabbing, all the this and that. The hormones didn't heal the trauma, and the attention that you once felt like, which could have felt like an unconditional love, is gone because those people have their own psychological issues and they don't need you now. They have to, like a vampire, they have to go back, or a tick, actually, go back to the next person on the journey and leech life out of them until they get to where you are. Okay. If you're transitioning. So what's left in a lifetime what is left is going to be a lifetime. And this is long because these kids are doing it at younger and younger ages. In the old days, I think you'd see was in their 30s or 40s or something like that. What's left is a lifetime of medical dependence, financial strain, and the heavy realization that the promise was hollow, more especially since they are not getting the slush fund money that they were getting from the socialists, right? So we saw this with Hale in Nashville, who still struggled with deep emotional pain after publicly adopting a male identity, or the Denver East high school shooter, a teenager who lashed out at school administrators when identity struggles and disciplinary issues collided. And really, even the Club Q shooting in Colorado Springs, where Anderson Aldrich claimed non-binary identity. You see the same disillusionment. The very community that should have offered belonging became the target of rage. Collapse doesn't always lead to violence, but for some, it hardens into resentment. And that is a very big problem because at this stage, the blame is projected outward, but not on the activists normally, not on the activists who overpromised, not on the medical system that fast-tracked their treatment, not on anybody who pushed them into carving their bodies up to become unable in any way, shape, or form to bear children if they wished, or to be a co-parent, whatever the situation. The biological process of regenerating the race or species is gone. It's not like you decided a life of celibacy. It's been given to you. Unless you want to go through some other insane surgeries, which they will just continue to use you as a training ground, right? I mean, you'll see the horrible stories, especially women with bottom surgery. You see more stuff from them than you do from the men with bottom surgery. But just look at the case of Cher's daughter, son, whatever. That was a horror show in and of itself. And imagine that he or she had the best doctors possible. Cher had all kinds of money, right? So anyway, at this stage, the blame is projected outward. Okay. It's not on the activists. I've already said that. It's not on the activists who promised your world will be 1,000 times better if and when you do this, but on society in general. And this is also brought about by the activists. The logic that they are selling these people is I did everything I was told to do. I became who I was supposed to be, but you, the world, still won't accept me. So there must be something wrong with you. I did what I was told. I jumped through the hoops. I cut off my penis. I cut off my vagina. I gave myself a hysterectomy. I gave myself a mastectomy. I gave myself unknown amounts of dope into my system, which has tore my mind and physical body up. I did it all because you told me at the end of the day, I was going to be great and they were going to love me, whoever they are. And that was society. It wasn't mom and dad. It was society in general. Basically, we're going to have a big parade and everybody's going to be happy. And that didn't happen. And then they turned around to look at their handlers, and their handlers give them the story that I just gave you, which is the world still isn't ready to accept you. We have to continue to do things with the world. That resentment turns into manifestos and eventually into violence. And the targets are usually symbolically chosen. Hale attacked a Christian elementary school representing traditional society. Okay. The Denver shooter attacked administrators, which were symbols of authority. Aldrich attacked an LGBTQ nightclub, lashing out at the very space that once represented belonging. And there was probably a lot in there, but nobody wants to talk about it, much like the Pulse nightclub shooting, which nobody wants to talk about, which we did. And you can see there was a very dark side to that as well. In every case, the violence was not random. It was meant to make society feel the pain the shooter carried inside. It was definitely at that level, very visceral. So here's where the things get complicated. The media often downplays or reframes the identity of these shooters. In Hale's case, some outlets even scolded the reporters for misgendering the killer, right? As though pronouns were the real issue. The pronouns are what killed all these people. In Aldrich's case, activists dismissed the non-binary claim altogether. And the activist groups, they interpret every tragedy, if it's a suicide, if it's a shooting, if it's anything like that, not as evidence that their philosophy of the transition has failed, but it's the proof that society's hostile, that society wants to kill transsexuals. That's what they will tell you. Just like you hear the mantra, by you misgendering somebody, transsexuals are now being murdered. They say it enough and it becomes real to a lot of these people. So if only there had been more acceptance, this would never have happened. Seriously, these would be lines you would see. You could have 10, 15 children murdered, shot in the face with a high caliber rifle. You know, do your parents really want to see that? No. But in your manifesto, you thought they deserved it because it's the ultimate level of narcissism in a way, right? You didn't understand how wonderful and great I was, so you are going to pay for it. And that has been pushed through the minds of a lot of these people by these support groups, okay? And this causes what we call a feedback loop. Every failure becomes another reason to double down on the ideology. No accountability, no self-reflection, just affirmation, more medicalization, and more promises. Because if you're that invested in this philosophy, if you've been that invested that you have cut yourself to pieces, how can you turn around the next day? And this was brought up in a conversation. I wish I remembered the guy, but I remember exactly what he said, which was, what do you do when these people are transing their kids over at 6 and 8 years old? And he said, the parents will never admit that they were wrong because they have so much invested in them, even if it is shown black and white that what you have done is monstrous. No parent is going to want to admit that they destroyed their child based on some flimsy fucking evidence or because the neighbors thought it was cool. Nobody wants to admit they destroyed their own child. Well, some people, but no sane person would want that. So the guilt would be at such a level that they themselves would also have to double down on the story. My child committed suicide. My child murdered some other children, right? Because society in general, you people would not accept them. But it was all being done up here in the kid's head. 99% of it was being done in the kid's head. So, you know, what are we saying? These are rare cases, so why do we focus on them? Okay. Isn't untreated mental illness the real culprit? Isn't it rejection from society, not transition, that causes this despair? These are valid questions, but here's the point. Mental illness and isolation exist in many populations. What's unique is here, ideology channels that instability into a predictable path. Once again, the ideology, the driver behind this, channels that instability into a predictable path. Promise, attention, collapse, resentment, violence. That pattern is visible, and ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. So what can we do about that? What can be done? Firstly, medical institutions must restore psychological gatekeeping. Not every case of distress is gender dysphoria. We need serious evaluation before irreversible steps are taken. Second, activist groups must be held accountable for overselling transition as salvation. Right now, they face zero consequences for the lives they left in ruins. And you see some of these people who were almost poster boys and girls for transition coming out and realizing that if they hadn't been pushed, they wouldn't have done it. But I was 12 or 13, and what did I know? Right? So thirdly, the media must report identities consistently, not sensationalize, but not conceal it either. If you were born a male and you're a shooter, you died as a male shooter, okay? And that you had this other issue going on. The truth matters in this case. And finally, oh, and also don't hide the manifestos, because those are important for the psychologists and psychological evaluations that should be done to build a database from this. This is all things that if this was a serial killer, the FBI behavioral group, whatever they call it, I don't know if it's the one they call it on television, but they would want copies of this. They would be building up references for later use. Okay. But at this point, I think we've had issues where they've either destroyed it, not mentioned it, or downplayed it, right? So finally, culturally, we need to reject both extremes. You have to reject blind affirmation, and you have to reject hostile rejection. The answer lies in compassionate realm. Obviously, you got to be sort of compassionate about this. You can't make a law that says, I transitioned to being a girl, men have to go out with me. Or when you see them, I went on a date with this guy and I didn't tell him that I was really a guy, and then something broke out below the belt and now he tried to kill me. There's a reason that happens, right? It's like, oh, there's a pleasant surprise. No, it's not a pleasant surprise to most people. Okay, regardless of what the adult film industry is telling you, no. Okay, so there can be a level, it has to be a level of compassionate realism, acknowledging real suffering, like I said, while refusing to sell false cures, or to put these people into a situation to inject your sick ideology upon the rest of America or whatever other country, because they're using this transitional thing to help spread their socialism, because they're saying, you need us because we'll give you free surgery, we'll give you free hair dye, we'll give you whatever you need, and we will make, at the point of a gun, everybody love you, which is what they're saying to these poor people, right? So trans-identifying mass shooters are not an epidemic, but they are a warning sign. They reveal how ideology can prey on the vulnerable, promises of salvation, can collapse into despair, and how resentment can explode into violence. If activists and the media continue to deflect blame onto society, this cycle will continue to repeat, guaranteed. But if we're willing to confront the uncomfortable truth that the ideology itself is very dangerous, right? We may finally break the timeline of awareness before it gets into tragedy again. So that's all we have. If you found it important, if you like this, you can share it, subscribe, like, whatever you're going to do. If you have questions and we can answer them, DM us, whatever source you're on here. I don't know if we're on YouTube. We're on our own page, www.southfloridaconservative.com. We're on Rumble. We're on BitChute and Substack, I think. So anywhere in there that you find that you want to contact us on any of these questions, please do, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Okay? Otherwise, have a good day, and we'll talk to you later.